Good evening. The purpose of this meeting is to conduct the business of the Gettysburg Area School District. Public comment is welcome and issues will be referred to the appropriate board, committee, or administrator. Comments will be summarized in the official board minutes, which will be available by contacting the business office. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones and other electronic devices. Before we move forward, could I please have a motion to suspend policy 006 and 006.1 for the purposes of tonight's meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to suspend policy 006 and 006.1. Also, I'd like to make a motion to suspend policy 903. 006 and 006.1 have to do with the in-person attendance and allowing virtual attendance, but 903 has to do with public participation, public comments. And in the interest of time and also being fair to the many people that sent emails to the school board, rather than have someone read those aloud and leave the opportunity to have those misquoted, I would like to request that these emails be officially recorded in the minutes of this meeting, so they are recorded publicly and are in black and white, and are there's no possibility for misinterpretation or misrepresentation.
I'd be apt to second both those motions if possible.
It was one motion. They were all three.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion on the floor that's been seconded. Any questions?
Yeah, hi Kenny, it's Kathleen. The motion that includes taking the emails that the board has received and putting them into the public comment portion of our meeting, I'm not sure that we are at liberty to do that without the express permission of those who wrote us the emails. And Bob,
so Kathleen, I'm sorry, I can elaborate on that a little bit. If you look at policy 903, it does say that the public comments, when you sign up for public comment and what you want to address the board for, that they are available to the press unless there is sensitive content in there. So there's a lot of people that took the time to write, and if they want them read, I would assume that they would be fine having them printed, and it is a matter of public record.
If I could do.
Oh, well, actually, one second. Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think I misunderstood you. I misunderstood you. I thought that you had requested that all of the emails that we received that pertain to the special budget request be entered into public comment. So I misunderstood. Okay.
And I apologize. If I can do a point of clarification, and the board's well aware because they were also included in the emails, there are approximately between 10 and 11 emails that address a particular issue with the SRO. They are all consistently about the same. There are only 3 of those emails that specifically asked that it be included as public comment. The other emails were directed to the board and made no mention as to whether or not they wanted it read at the meeting. So if we were looking at a regular meeting, I would assume that the 3 people that specifically their intent in writing, they stated that they wanted to be a part of public content are the emails that we'd be referring to.
So Kenny, because those people requested that their emails be a part of public comment, do we really owe it to them to read their emails at the meeting? Because if they were present at the meeting, they would be reading their emails out loud to us, right? And there are only 3 of them, so I don't know that it would take that much time to honor their request.
I'd like to amend the motion to separate out the 903 from the other 2 policies that we're going to suspend. I think they should be separate.
Well, at this point, if I'm not mistaken, we have the first motion that includes 006, 0061, 903, and then we have a subsequent motion to separate the motions into 2. But I do not have a second on that yet.
Kenny, I'll second.
You can only deal with one motion at a time, correct?
Yes, you are correct.
Yeah. So we have to vote on the first motion before we can make the second motion?
That would be my understanding, correct, Mr. McQuaid?
Well, yep. Before we vote, I would like to further clarify the reason that I put this motion in place is because if they are a matter of public record and are in black and white, there would leave no possibility to have their public comments that someone took the time to write the board and request be part of public record. There would be no opportunity to have it misquoted or have it misconstrued. That was the purpose, to preserve these exact comments. And people took the time to write and submit these comments, and rather than just have them read and have sound bites taken and reported on, I wanted it as a matter of public record and recorded in black and white. So that was my intent for this motion.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. They could be recorded by being read aloud, and they could be submitted into the minute, all of them. I would like to respect the people that actually ask for them to be read aloud also.
Bob, you're muted. I keep seeing you try to talk, but your mic's muted.
It said it's not.
See, I paid attention and muted and forgot that I was muted. So my understanding is that, Mike, you just want the 3 that are to be part of the public record, instead of having them summarized, they're put in the minutes in their entirety, but you'd object to them being read.
Well, the purpose of my motion was to save time, but we've already wasted more time debating this, and when I could have just read them. But there was also, I wasn't aware that there was only 3 that specifically requested that they be read. I know that we've received dozens of emails on the same subject, and it was my understanding that they all were to be read. So we could sit here and keep talking about it, or we can just vote.
The reason I seconded the motion was due to time restraint. I felt that they were lengthy, and I wanted to capture, the gist of what they were saying. Having it in writing was extremely important, as we all know that they have the ability to have their voice be heard. But again, we've spent so much time. It's amazing.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, if we don't read them out loud as they've requested, we haven't honored their request to be part of public comment. So I would be more comfortable if we read them out loud.
So, Mr. McQuaid, there's a motion on the floor, and someone wanted to amend it. So where do we stand with Robert's rules in terms of that?
Well, as I understand, as I heard it, there was a motion, then there was a motion made and seconded to amend the motion. So you would vote first on the motion to amend, and the amendment would be to remove 903 from the motion. And if that, well, depending on what happens with that, then you'd move on to the main motion.
Here, I'll make it easy, because rather than we can sit here and debate this all night, I withdraw my motion. So we want to play politics. I withdraw my motion. I'd like to get this meeting underway.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any questions on the motion for 006-006.1?
Well, actually, I really do have a question. I'm a little bit perplexed. I don't know that we're playing politics, and I'm concerned to hear that comment. And we don't have to discuss that now, but I mean, I'm perplexed by that. So anyway, Kenny, I'm sorry. What is the motion that we're voting on?
The motion on the floor for vote for question is 006-006.1. Are there any further questions on that motion? Roll call.
There is no motion. Mike withdrew his entire motion, so we have to redo an entire new motion.
There's no motion on the floor. There's no motion on the floor right now.
Redo a whole new
Maybe we could spend a few more minutes. Maybe we could spend a few more minutes playing with Robert's rules.
I have a motion to suspend 006 and 006.1 for the purpose of tonight's meeting.
I'll make the motion.
And second.
Question. Roll call. Al.
Yes.
Timmons. I'm sorry. Timmons not here. I'll get to that when we do roll call. Kathleen.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Amy Beth.
Yes.
Carrie.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Sylvan. And I vote yes.
Yes.
Ms. Collins, all members are present here this evening with the exception of Mr. Lynn. He has been excused. The people who are here, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. Notices and communications, Dr. Perrin.
First, just wanted to clarify, because the board had received several communications, that there must be enough misunderstanding floating out there, that just wanted to, in communications, clarify some of the conversations from the last board meeting. First and foremost, the SRO position that is a special budget request is a safety and security position. It has nothing to do with staffing for mental health support. The reason that mental health support was discussed at the last meeting is because the board approved a contract with Effective School Solutions to provide counseling support at the middle school. So the SRO is specifically about safety and security. The SSA contract was specific about mental health support. Those two things are not connected. They're separate items. So wanted to clarify that at the front end of this meeting to clear up any miscommunication that would have come out of the information from the previous meeting. I have one more communication. We will tomorrow send some end of the year dates out to the district community. Just a couple of dates of note, and again, these will come out tomorrow via email. May 25th will remain a holiday. May 29th will be the final day of remote learning for seniors. June 5th will be the final day of remote learning for K-11 students. And we will continue our student meals program through the end of June 2020. Thanks.
Any additional notices or communications? Okay, hearing none. Citizens' participation, as we discussed at the beginning of the meeting, there were a variety of emails, or a number of emails that came into the district through the school board relating to the SRO position that was discussed at the last meeting. 3 of them distinctly indicated that they wanted their communications to be part of our public meeting. Andrew is going to go from here with those 3 emails.
Okay. The first email came from Jenny Dumont. She said, I was disturbed by the content of this morning's Gettysburg Times, which reported that Superintendent Perrin said that GASD is looking to add another police officer because, quote, another officer is key to assisting students with mental health needs, end quote. Wouldn't it make more sense to add more counseling staff who are trained in aiding students with mental health needs? I urge the board to consider adding another social worker, psychologist, or counselor instead of armed police staff. Thank you for your consideration. The second came from Hannah Barber. After reading the Gettysburg Times article, GASD may add a second police officer, and watching the April 20th GASD school board meeting, it is clear that the board is concerned about students' mental health. Board members and guests spoke frequently about the importance of this topic and the need for additional support for students. Dr. Jason Perrin, the superintendent, stated that the district is seeing more and more specific mental health issues, and that we are seeing them in larger numbers and at earlier ages. Jeremy Lusk, principal of the high school, reported that counselors at the high school are, quote, stretched, that their time is spent on handling students' mental health crisis, and that there are lines of students at the door waiting to meet with counselors. I am confused as to why the school board's solution to these concerns is to consider hiring a new dean of students at the high school and a school resource officer at the middle school. It was stated in the meeting that both hires are to be made specifically for the purpose of addressing students' mental health needs. However, it would make significantly more sense for the board to hire a licensed mental health professional. For example, an additional social worker would have the ability to provide students with mental health treatment, facilitate therapeutic groups, provide meditation services, and handle mental health crises. Neither a dean of students nor a school resource officer are able to provide any of those services. A social worker meets the needs that the school board has identified far more than a school resource officer or dean of students could. I'm particularly concerned about the hiring of a police officer to be stationed at Lincoln Elementary School and the middle school. Research has shown repeatedly that officers in school do not make schools safer. In fact, they can cause harm. According to the Justice Policy Institute, schools employing school resource officers see higher rates of suspensions, expulsions, and arrests that funnel kids into the criminal justice system. There is potential for trauma to be caused to students whose disciplinary actions are handled by an enforcement-oriented police officer rather than a qualified mental health professional or a school administrator. There are no comparable risks in hiring a mental health professional. Further, for more information on the negative effects of school resource officers, I recommend the Justice Policy Institute's report, Education Under Arrest. Additionally, a mental health professional would not cost nearly as much as the expected cost of the police officer. The board quoted a maximum cost for the police officer at $87,360. Hiring a licensed clinical social worker or school psychologist to prove mental health services to students would be substantially more cost effective. And the final public comment comes from Joanne Myers. She says, I read in this morning's Gettysburg Times, 23rd of April, that the GASD is considering hiring a second resource officer to work with students in the schools. I am confident that the existing resource officer does good work in the schools and offers a reassuring, valuable presence to students and staff alike. However, I was confused in reading the Times article by the suggestion that the reason for hiring a resource officer was to improve mental health resources to students. Surely in that case, it makes sense to hire someone trained to provide mental health services, a social worker, counselor, or other professional in the field. I agree that students no doubt need such resources, but it makes no sense to me to imply that you are going to provide them by hiring someone whose training, preparation, and expertise all lie elsewhere. As a taxpayer in the borough, I am glad to know that my school taxes would go to provide the kind of mental health help that students today increasingly need, but I hope and expect that the school board will provide what is really needed. And that is it.
Thank you, Andrew. 5 and 6.
Mr. President.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
President, I'm sorry. Yeah, so
Yes,
I need to make a comment to clarify some things. So Andrew, thank you for taking the time to read those. It's never easy reading someone else's words. But I do want to clarify, you heard a recurring theme in those emails, the school board, the school board, the school board. Dr. Perrin made a statement before those emails were read to try and clarify. We have a small specific group of people in the community that took the time to write a couple of dozen emails and go on a social media campaign. First of all, the school board doesn't make recommendations about resource officers, about counseling, mental health. And the administrators and the superintendent of our fine district, they make recommendations to the school board based on identifying where and what type of resources are needed. And you have people that obviously watched the video from the April 20th school board meeting and did not watch the April 6th school board meeting. And you had Dr. Perrin being misquoted and having his comments taken out of context in the Gettysburg Times that created a virtual firestorm. And I just want to clarify that some of the stuff that we were hearing there is not accurate. And frankly, I'm a little bit frustrated and just want to take 2 seconds to set the record straight.
Thank you, Mike. Any additional comments? I know we don't normally do that, but.
Kenny, if I may add, I appreciate Dr. Perrin setting the record straight regarding the actual recommendation or the rationale behind that. I'm hoping either Andrew or someone from the district can contact the Gettysburg Times. I believe it was Alex Hayes who actually wrote the article, and maybe ask them for a correction, or if they somehow, some way, we improve that communication process between us and the Times to make sure that future misquotes are minimal or don't happen at all. And with someone like Andrew on board, who is a professional communicator and our liaison to the Times and the media, that shouldn't happen anymore. I'm thinking those misquotes should be very, very limited and minimal. And I would appreciate any efforts from the district to do whatever we can to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Al. Anybody additionally? Okay, number 5 and number 6, routine approvals and items for board action. There are none on the agenda tonight. We're going to move forward to informational item, which is Dr. Perrin's budget information. Dr. Perrin?
Sure, thanks, Ken. Andrew, you can. All right, I'm going to go through a number of slides, made some changes to the slides based on updated information. And then I'm going to go through a couple of worksheets that we put together that helps us come across this information specifically. So just so I can get through the entire presentation, if folks could hold questions till the end, and then I'll answer as many as I can at that point. Thanks. Andrew, next slide. Next slide. We've done these before, gone through our goals, gone through process information. So basically collapsed all of the variables into one summary slide. This information is just as of this current week. We did add the savings that we would see through staffing attrition, as we currently have 5 retirements that are listed and have been approved through personnel. Next slide. So as of this week, total revenue increase projected at 2.5%, to local revenue increase of 2.3. It assumes a local tax collection rate of 95.4. We did increase that 0.1% from last year, just based on historical data, as we always try to be as accurate as we can when making the projections. State revenues projected to go up 1.9%, and federal revenues projected at 20%, though that's the smallest portion of our budget, so that doesn't equate to a lot of dollars. Next slide. The updates did not change on percentages. We're still predominantly locally funded at about 68%, state 30%, federal 2%. Next slide, Andy. Expenditure projections, at least as of mid-April, 3.4% increase. That increase assumes our increased expenditures for contracts and agreements with our employees. It assumes the increases and decreases from the previous summary slide, and also it assumes continued support of the 5-year technology plan. However, as I stated, the first meeting where we first started taking a look at this, we did not ask for another instructional coach to be funded for 2021. So we're holding at 3 instructional coaches. So that's the only change. That's the only change there. Next slide, please. And the expenditures pretty much hold about where they were, within a couple of percent. Next slide, please. So the unassigned fund balance, if we did not entertain any SBRs this year, so at 0%, basically with the current revenues and expenditures. The fund balance would be right at about the 8%. We're supposed to, within policy, keep the fund balance between 6% and 8%. And at a 0% tax increase, it would utilize 4.1 million of fund balance to bridge the gap between our revenues and expenditures. The transportation slides I've shown previously, those have not changed. Go ahead the whole way through transportation, Andrew. A special budget request. Go ahead back to special budget requests. So the special budget requests we touched on a couple meetings ago, touched on them again last meeting. The board certified behavior analyst is a support position for supporting behavior plans, working with teachers. As Kelly mentioned at the last meeting, the SRO, as we mentioned, we were looking at for the middle school Lincoln campuses. The reason that campus was considered is because the secondary buildings tend to have the highest degree of need. And I'll say it again, like this position is not a mental health position. This is a safety and security position. The Dean of Students, as Jeremy talked about at the last meeting, is requested at the high school. Please remember that these are all still requests and have not been part of a recommended budget yet to this point. They total $229,021, at least at this point. Next slide, please. So if we recommend a proposed budget on May 4th, which would meet the state's timeline, we try to hit as many of the variables on that slide as we can. The first is we try to reduce the structural deficit. Obviously, with what we're showing right there, that wouldn't happen. We used about 3.6 million to balance the current year's budget. Next year, if we didn't do anything, it would take about 4.1. So that piece would be going in the wrong direction. Though I think that we would better predict revenues and expenditures by increasing the collection rate. Our remaining fund balance would be within policy limit. We would meet the 5-year technology plan goals specific for student learning. The only piece is we wouldn't be adding a 4th instructional coach to that model. We have a plan to fund our ongoing capital projects. That would not be impacted by that. Everything that you saw on those previous slides continues us funding our capital projects as we've been funding them correctly in order to save the district money over time. And our reserve accounts should remain stable enough to mitigate some of the possible increases in the future. Next slide. Again, that's been our tax history of the past couple of years. This is my 3rd year in the district, so we were at 0.86% of the first budget that I worked with administration to recommend, and we were at 1% for the current school year. And as I've talked about the last couple of years that I've been here, we've been trying to stay within 0.75 and 1.25 and do kind of incremental increases each year as not to hit the index at 2.6 and then below it and then at the index. So we're trying to avoid those peaks and valleys in that trend and trying to keep kind of a level trend line with a smaller percentage. Next slide, Andrew. So in terms of meeting state guidelines for the budget, we'd recommend and adopt a proposed budget on May 4th. May 18th, June 1st, we'd make any changes that obviously we would find with revenues and expenditures. And we take one last look at revenues in June before looking at the final budget so that whenever we're looking at the final budget in June, if we're able to make some decreases there, we tend to do it. I think the last 2 years that I've been here, we've decreased by at least a couple tenths of a % in June each year as the numbers have become available. We certainly can't promise that every year, but we take this part of the process very seriously. So we continue to monitor all of those budget items as we move through April, May, and June. We're still about 2 months away from a final budget. So what you're seeing tonight is kind of the best projections in April, knowing of course that as May and June roll around, we'll be able to further refine those numbers and get more accurate as we move towards June. Andrew, can you put up the next handout? It was a budget summary handout. Yeah, there it is. Thanks. So this is just a worksheet that we use when we put things together. I use it for putting together the PowerPoint for the board. I labeled those columns A and B just to make it easy to refer to. All the information that I just covered on the slides would be basically like the A column of that sheet. So that shows basically a 0% tax increase. It has our unassigned fund balance right at around 8%. And again, that's based on April's data. Letter B, the column right next to it, shows a 0.8% increase. That keeps the fund balance similarly to where it is in column A, and it provides about right around $250,000 in revenue. So that's how much it would take. I wanted to show what it would take to account for special budget requests. If that's the route that we would go, it would be 0.8%. So that's kind of the difference from 0 to 0.8 is about $250,000. If you look at the red numbers, about 3/4 of the way down that page, you can see that in the previous year, we were at about 3.6%. I'm sorry, 3.4% of fund balance to budget this year's budget. And with both columns A and B, we're just a little bit over 4 million to bridge both of those gaps. So the expenditures are growing faster than the revenues. So that's kind of the difference between the scenarios in A and B. And then Andrew, the unassigned fund balance sheet was the other one that you pulled up, and those columns A and B basically go along with the previous charts A and B. So A is a 0%, B is a 0.8%, and that kind of shows what that looks like in those scenarios. A couple of things that we have to keep in mind is that we're in April. So as we move through May and June, if we see a decrease in projected revenues in certain areas or an increase in expenditures, those would have to be taken into consideration when looking at columns A and B if those changes occur. Looking at 0.8, we could then look and say, 0.8, and then it gives us a little bit of room to say if there are any significant changes over the next 2 months in the wrong direction, we can then pull some items out of the special budget request column and still be able to be within that 0.8%. It gives us a little bit of room as opposed to starting with the 0 and then having to move up as we move to June. As we approach May 4th, I would rather approach it as looking at 0.8 and then drawing it back as we move towards June. So those are just a couple of scenarios. I just painted those for you to kind of see, what that would look like. And certainly, these are all items that are subject to change as we move through the next 2 months. But if there are any questions, certainly I could answer those at this point.
Hi, Jason, Kathleen. The two spreadsheets that you've shown us, this table and the spreadsheet before it,
Yeah.
did you send these to us? Do we have that in our email?
Yeah, you should on Friday.
Somehow I missed it. I'm going to go take a quick look. I do have some questions, but I'd be happy to open the floor to my colleagues before I begin with them.
Sure.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
Okay. All right. Jason, thank you. I know that you are truly an expert in building school budgets. I've learned that about you these last 2 years. So I thank you and Belinda and your whole team for the thoughtfulness you've put into tonight's presentation. And you've answered one of my questions, which really was about the structural deficit. And I had a question, what happens if we do not raise taxes in the next budget year? And you've told us that we'll use about 4.1 million of the unassigned fund balance to cover the budget, which would assume that we are agreeing to the 3 SBRs. But what happens to the structural deficit if we do raise taxes? If we do, let's say, put into place a 0.8% tax increase?
It depends on, so none of the variables, they all work in concert, so it's tough to pull them out in isolation. So let me answer what I think you're asking, and if I get it wrong, just correct me, okay? So with a 0.8, that is built to just arbitrarily cover about $250,000 worth of expenditures, and the SBRs equal about 230. So let's just say, for instance, that we did 0.8% and didn't do any of the SBRs. What that would do then is that would drop that 4.1 number down maybe $250,000. So it might take that budget gap to about 3.9 million or so. I'm just doing the math in my head, so don't check me with a calculator at this point. But I think is that kind of what you were asking, Kathleen, or?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, that is helpful. And then I do have a question in general about special budget requests. And
Sure.
Just so we really understand kind of how those, not so much how they come to be, but I'm trying to really understand why special budget requests are special budget requests, right? So are these meant to be, philosophically, are they meant to be like one-time requests? Like, and I'm not gonna even make up anything good for that. So like we need to, I don't know, do something grand and it's a one-time expenditure. Or are they meant to be, as they seem to have become over the last couple of years, staff positions?
They're generally, and in terms of the verbiage, that's what the district was calling them whenever I arrived here. So I just didn't change the lingo. I think the easiest way to think about them is to think about them as requests for the coming year's budget that weren't in the previous year's budget. And because most of the things that we would ask for, or that folks might ask for, before they get to this point or this level, we really take a look at the overall district budget and try to make increases and decreases where we can. So if say for instance, if someone had a special budget request that cost $12,000, before we would make that a special budget request and bring it to the board, we would exhaust like all possible places where we might be able to afford that if it made sense. Because staffing positions tend to be the highest dollar amount, that's why you tend to see staffing positions coming through as SBRs, just because they're brand new positions that weren't in the budget the previous year, and they weren't things that we could easily say, hey, we'll take this out of a different budget line.
If I remember correctly, 3 years ago, I think there was a special budget request for furniture. So they haven't all, in the last 3 years, haven't always been a staff member, but sometimes it's an object.
Yeah, I think that the at that point, whenever that SBR was specific to furniture, what we decided to do to have that not happen on a yearly basis, that's what caused us to basically create that furnitures, fixtures, and equipment funding line that we do. So we have a small amount for FFE for each of the organizational levels on an ongoing basis. So we try to take care of as much of that as we can on a yearly basis, so things don't pile up and folks don't need larger sums of money for those types of things, you know, a couple of years down the road.
Jason, this is Al. With option A and B, and I know you were differentiating between requests from your administrative team and then final recommendations by the district office team. Does both option A and B include all three of the personnel positions for special budget requests?
Only column B does.
Just column B.
Column A is if we took this past year's budget, just rolled it forward a year and didn't do anything new. The challenge with 0.0 in your May 4th preliminary budget is you've built no room for any changes that we don't have control over in May and June.
Right.
So the reason I was talking about looking at 0.8 is that if we do see some changes in April and June, we can accommodate those within the 0.8 by withdrawing or utilizing SBRs or not using SBRs, those kinds of things.
Jason, given the current situation with the pandemic, with local tax collection rates, I know we've tried to make that a more accurate percentage.
Right.
And the others in fear that could be somewhat skewed a little bit, as well as state revenue based upon everything that's happening right now with the current crisis. Do you think we can still depend upon almost 95% collection rate and almost 2% from the state, an increase of 2%?
I mean, we can project the best that we can. I think the last we checked with the local taxing body, they really weren't seeing a decrease in their tax payments. But the problem is that, you know, bills will go out in July and we won't have a good idea of what this next cycle looks like until after we're in it. Part of the reason of making sure, if you notice columns A and B on that sheet, I've tried to keep the fund balance, because there's not much difference between 6 and 8% in a fund balance when you start talking about, you're talking like, you know, $1 million really. So you don't have a whole lot of wiggle room there. So the reason that we're trying to keep that as close to 8% as possible is, though we're dealing with the pandemic right now, and, you know, talking to Belinda and Tom and PASBO and all those types of places, I think that there's a better chance for all of this to have a significant impact on next year's budget as we plan for 21-22 than we're seeing right now with 2021. Some of the indicators, at least for revenue, are lagging indicators to a degree. So for instance, I'll just give a couple of examples. So this year, our board's ability to raise taxes is 2.6%. That's our index. There's a really good chance that next year's index is going to be a lot lower than that. So if there are increases and decreases that we don't control, those are going to happen at the same time as us not having the ability to fill those gaps with, you know, with a tax increase. So one of the main reasons for trying to keep the fund balance as close to 8% as possible is knowing that we're going to be dealing with some unknowns next year with things like earned income tax, collection rates, the Act 1 index, you know, all of those types of things. I think that next year's cycle could prove to be more challenging than this year's cycle, even though we're dealing with the pandemic right now.
Yeah, I think that's a prudent move on your part. Just one or two final quick things. Jason, I know you mentioned that expenses are growing faster than revenue. My concern is, and what I've seen happen to a lot of districts around the area, is that they utilize a lot of fund balance to balance revenue and expenses at a pretty high rate. We have a pretty healthy fund balance right now. We use 4.1 for next year's budget, another 4 or 5 million for the following year, and so on. We can eat up that savings account pretty quickly with growing expenses and revenue not keeping pace. Are you concerned at all that our fund balance in the next few years could get pretty extremely low, and we may be forced to go to the full index to balance revenue and expenses?
Yeah, it's certainly something that it's been something that we've been watching since I came in, because that difference between revenues and expenditures has been in the $3 million to $4 million range. Since I've been here, we've been fortunate that at the end of each fiscal year, whenever we get our audit information back, that we're able to put that money back into the fund balance. So we've been able to kind of cycle money back into the fund balance. But your point's taken out in that it doesn't take too many changes to make that not sustainable, over a period of time. There are lots of different ways to deal with that. You could look at even a 1% tax increase with no SBRs to try to close that gap some. There are a lot of different directions we could go with that. But when I make a recommendation on the 4th, it'll be to kind of do the best we can, not just for our short-term fiscal health, but over the next several years, understanding that next year could be a challenge.
And Jason, my final comment would be if you wouldn't mind maybe making a remark or two. I know school taxes are incredibly unpopular, and I get that. The fear of going with a no tax increase whatsoever, as I've had business managers share with me in the past, is the compounding effect over the next few years of not doing anything, or as you said, strategically going small increments rather than hitting with a big number at some point. Could you just share a little bit about your thoughts regarding that philosophy or that compounding effect of doing absolutely zero?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you look at the zero column there, that number is only going to grow because we know that our most significant expenses are people expenses. So because the contracts grow each year, those costs are going to grow each year. So if you go zero, then next year when those increases come, it's almost going to look compounded. And the problem is, at least for next year, based on what kind of folks are projecting, is that we talked a little bit earlier, and you just mentioned it, Al, in terms of going to the full index, at least in recent years, because the economy's been good, has been somewhere in the 2% range. We could be in a situation where we're trying to bridge that gap and don't even have the opportunity to utilize the Act 1 index could be 1.7 next year, or it could be 1.6 or something like that. So there are a lot of unknowns, which is why I wanted to try to kind of paint this picture to say, I really think we need to keep fund balance healthy to be able to deal with the changes that we can't control. Because you as an elected board, folks have elected you to obviously work with me to make, the fiscal health, to take care of the fiscal health of the district. But really all you have control over is that tax increase on a yearly basis. So things can happen that our board has no control over, and then our board is then limited to that index in terms of what it can do to mitigate some of those changes.
Jason, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Hey, Al, actually, I agree with Al, and I don't want to change the topic, but what's interesting here, and Kathleen started to allude to it, and I'm sure Carrie could after being here 3 years, we can control some things. Last year, I argued, and I'll argue again this year, and we'll make a change, hopefully, that SBRs should be separated out of the budget and voted on individually. Unlike the legislature where you can tag a bill with other stuff, I think that each of these are separate individual items that are being requested. And I'm speaking for myself, I sure would like to hear a lot more justification on those positions. And I'll say again, like I said last year, they're reoccurring positions. There is expense and debt with those positions that continue to build year in, year out. They just don't go away. Dr. Parent acknowledged this today, and I'm glad he did. Our problem is not this year. Our problem is next year. And I'm not so sure with the health of the district that we're in right now. And in the last 3 years since I've been here, we've put on, I think, double-digit staff and have accommodated everybody across the board. I don't think there's one vote that's been lost on any request. I mean, somebody can fact check me. I believe this year we have to sit back and really take a hard look at what we're doing. And let's not talk about the 08 or the 0. We control what we're going to add to this budget and then keep going back next year, the year after, the year after. I mean, that's just where I'm at, folks.
Kenny,
Mr. Chairman.
good points, because oftentimes to column B, there can be a change, and what's in column B could be reduced once some of the state and federal dollars come in. It could be reduced slightly. But the other part of the good point is we have been put in a position as board members to vote on the special budget request as a package. So when you're making a decision that you really believe that there should be a school social worker, but tied to that is also funding for a lacrosse team or a music teacher, it makes it difficult to look at each item individually and truly understand the impact then of that decision. One more point along with the special budget request, they all come with an impact statement. And I would love to see if that impact is actually realized by reporting on these special budget requests that should follow along in the years to come after they've been approved. And not just necessarily qualitative data, but quantitative data as well on those, because they are presented as needed items and that have a specific impact, and then the resulting impact, learning about that resulting impact would be very valuable.
I couldn't agree any more with you, Carrie, than what you said. And you certainly have sat through some, along with Kelly, some of these budget meetings that we've had. And I think we're in such a unique position right now. And we proclaim that the district is one of the top districts in the state, in the country. We give accolades across the board. And me personally, need to see these SBRs separated individually. And I need additional information on all of them. And I won't hold up anyone more, but for example, the Dean of Students, Jeremy actually, and I know he's on, he can clarify, I heard him say that there was a significant reduction of 2 at the guidance office at the high school. And I'm just wondering, when you start to compare apples and oranges, is Jeremy in the high school, and he can only answer that, better suited for a guidance officer or a guidance counselor opposed to a Dean of Students? And that's the questions that I have. And it's difficult on Zoom. And before we leave tonight, I'll put a thing out to the board on how we'll move forward in the future. Having said that, I'll turn it over to anybody else who wants to speak.
Jason.
Yeah, Tim.
Two questions here, I guess.
Sure.
So in what different facets do we accumulate money in our unassigned fund balance? Is it just
unassigned
revenue, or is it?
So at the end of each fiscal year, we hire somebody to do an internal audit, and that's one of the first things that you all saw as new board members was the auditor talking about the previous year's budget. So the money that's not spent at the end of a fiscal year rolls back into the unassigned fund balance. And if I miss anything, I'll let Belinda jump in, just given this is what she works, excuse me, diligently at every day. But and obviously everything I'm covering with you all today is through the hard work of she, Tom, and their department. You know, I can make sense of the numbers at the end, but a lot of turning this into data really comes out of their office. So Tim, the major portion of it comes at the end of the audit when we see from revenues and expenditures how much is truly left over at the end of that fiscal year.
Okay. And then just in this document that's up, when you're showing the projected, if you had a 0 tax increase or a 0.8, it's only showing that 0.8 really only gave us $20,000.
Right, because the B column creates another $250,000 of revenue, which would cover the SBRs if we did the SBRs. But the reason I was building it in is not just for the SBRs, but the mere fact that there will be changes between now and June. So that's what we could use to deal with those changes. So for instance, say I prioritized those 3 SBRs with my team, and then we saw that we were going to have a revenue drop. So then we might come back with 0.8%, which might be 0.8% tax increase with only 1 SBR, the rest of that revenue needing to meet our already existing obligations. So it's
okay. So you were showing column B is with the SBRs at 0.08 and column A is without the SBRs at nothing.
exactly, Tim.
Okay. And then my other question was, in the budget as a whole, is the items from the 5-year plan that we have that were supposed to be scheduled for this coming year, are they in there or not?
So you mean the 5-year tech plan?
Yes.
So the 5-year tech plan,
The
Capital.
projects plan.
yeah, this
Capital improvement plan.
so that 0.0 and that 0.8 enable us to keep funding our capital projects as we've been funding them.
Okay.
Kenny, it's
This is
campaign.
my,
Agree.
I'm sorry. I thought somebody was,
Or Kathleen, I'm not sure who
Yeah,
went
I
first.
did. And I think Mike and I were speaking at the same time. Mike, would you like to go ahead?
He's tried to speak like 3 different times, so I think he probably should.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing, Mike, if that's you, I'm not hearing you, sir. I've not heard him, so I apologize.
Well, I hope we can hear from him. And while we are kind of waiting for that technical issue to work itself out, Kenny, I just want to say I'm really in agreement with you that the SBR should be broken apart, and we should really consider them separately and not vote on them as one package deal, should all 3 make it their way to the final vote on the budget. But you know what? I go back to still kind of questioning the whole philosophy of a special budget request. It's called a special budget request. And it just seems to me that if something is essential, if something is a critical path need, shouldn't it just be included in whatever budget recommendation comes forward as being a part of the budget, even if it has to displace something to make room for it, versus being called and thought of as something special? When I think of something special, I think of something that is needed, is wanted, but not necessarily, mission critical, if you will. So just to throw that out there. And, something I just want to share with my colleagues on the board that, there is so much uncertainty in how the pandemic really will impact what our income is in all of the areas in which we collect income. And so I've got to tell you that how I'm looking at this budget proposal, I don't believe that we are in expansion mode right now. And what I'm going to be looking for is some evidence that any kind of increase in this budget is truly mission critical versus kind of a want. Thank you.
I'll speak to the SBR piece of it as well. So we basically have just kept the lingo that was here when I arrived. The paperwork that's utilized for the SBRs was paperwork that was created through the Finance and Facilities Committee. So we can certainly change in future years, like how we refer to those things and even which documents are used. My suggestion is that we just take it back through that committee since our current practice came out of the committee. And Kathleen, can I get clarification from one of your last comments? When you said we're not in growth mode, do you mean growth in number of positions or growth in revenue?
I suppose time will tell. I can't imagine we will be in growth in revenue, but I was really speaking to as far as expanding our service offerings, if you will. So growing our budget, growing our expenditures. Okay. Outside of anything that will, be mandated to grow. So that's what I mean by expansion of, I'm sorry, I'm a business person, so I'm thinking expansion of service offerings. I hope that makes sense.
Sure.
Actually, I'm not sorry I'm a business person, but I was using that lingo.
I gotcha. No problem.
We have any additional questions for Dr. Parent on the budget?
I do, if you can hear me.
Go ahead.
Jason, this one is for you. Looking at staffing needs, have you met with all 5 building administrators to see what their needs or their requests are for next year that don't fit under the SBRs?
Yeah, all of the budget heads have met with both the business office and have shared any special budget requests with me. So the current numbers that you're seeing are the numbers based on their requests and basically what we've allocated to those to those requests.
All right, so my question, trying to phrase it correctly, are we looking at staffing needs for Franklin Township based on what we heard a number of months ago?
So we always build a position in the budget because enrollments and various things, fluctuate up and down. So the 0% zero column, both columns A and B would allow us to meet that need at Franklin.
Okay, thanks.
Good question.
I apologize. I am having difficulty. Did somebody ask another question?
No, I think that was it.
I can't.
Yeah, that was my only question, Kenny.
Thank you, Sylvan. Anything additional? Dr. Parent, anything additional?
No, that's it.
Kenny, I do have a couple questions about the SBRs. So we talked about them at our meeting last week. So, but here are a couple of extra questions. So the board certified behavior analyst, SBR, that's a K through 12 position. And I'm wondering how it's different from or complements the proposed high school dean of student position.
So I'll let Kelly, are you still on this evening?
I'm still here.
All right. Kelly, can you speak to the BCBA?
Sure. A BCBA is a highly specialized position, and this person has a credential that is very specific to behavior analysis, understanding why students behave in the way they do, and then targeting behavioral interventions and instruction to correct that behavior. And the goal is to do that all while the student is able to remain in their current educational placement. Some specialized agencies in our area have board certified analysts who may be associated with a student because they have outside agency help. But this position, as a district position, allows us to use this expertise to combat some of the behavior issues that are, occurring in all grade levels, from kindergarten through high school. Unfortunately, one of our methods currently of treating this, the issue of students who have severe behavior, is to find an out-of-district placement that has a smaller class ratio, therapists who work with students, a counselor who may be in the classroom at the same time as the teacher. By employing this type of a position, we enable our district to better target our interventions and hopefully decrease behaviors that have kids out of classrooms. So the ultimate goal is kids can control and learn how to manage their emotions and self-regulate while remaining, to the extent that's possible, in their classroom and not impacting their achievement. Because every time a student leaves, they're leaving instruction. And we have students who are in, the guidance office struggling, or in school suspension in the secondary level, or who don't come to school because they know they're going to get in trouble. And so all those students are missing valuable instructional time. And that's one of the primary roles of the behavior analyst, is to get to it, and to get to it quickly, and help the team working with that student develop a plan. We have the ability to contract this service. We contracted it a couple times this past year. And to be honest, it was okay. And I'd prefer to have somebody who's committed to the kids, who's part of the district. When you contract this service, those people come in, they swoop in, they do their thing, they leave. They're not there the following Monday when the child has the same breakdown. They're not there a month later when we have a backslide. So the point of being able to have this person on staff is that they're ours, they're committed, they're part of the fabric of Gettysburg.
Kelly, could you also differentiate how this is different than a school psychologist?
Yeah, well, a school psychologist has some of the skills to do maybe some behavior analysis, just because they are data-minded and data collecting people. That's what they do. But the board certified analyst, or the BCBA, this is all they did in terms of their preparation. They have mastered, and they often are master's level educators, but they have mastered behavior analysis, whereas a school psychologist, has mastered their delivery and assessment of students, like cognitive and achievement assessments, and they assist in this, because right now, we don't have this individual on staff, so a school psychologist is part of the team that helps to lead the process for students, but it's not their I don't know, it's not the best thing that they do. They can do it. They also honestly have priorities that are time sensitive because of evaluations that have legal mandates for completion. So a student who is being assessed for special ed, we have 60 days to do that. So that is, maintaining those timelines and compliance It's part of their realm. Getting at behaviors is important, but there's no, in some cases, there's no necessarily a legal time limit. In some cases there is, but in a lot of times, you know, we're not under the gun from IDEA and Chapter 14 regulations.
Thank you, Kelly. And I do have one more question. If you
Sure.
would humor me. Is there an agency that perhaps allows for a full-time placement of someone of this certification, so that perhaps just the, you know, the cost is there not, I'm asking this because that, you know, once we hire someone on, it's a reoccurring cost and benefits. Agencies offer a full-time placement in a district?
I can think of probably one or two that do perhaps have that. They may need to hire that person. They may not have somebody on staff to give away, but that means that that entity has to agree to hire and pay for that person's salary, and we pay the entity a contract. That's an option that we can look at. There isn't anybody currently that I'm aware of in Adams County who has a BCBA for hire for, you know, 37.5 hours a week. They may for 10. I don't know if 10's enough.
Thank you, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
And Kelly, hi, one last question about this. Would the BCBA be mostly focused on our special education students or focused on all students equally?
Well, the focus would be on the students who are struggling the most with behaviors. Sometimes that it happens to be our students who are already identified as a special education student, and sometimes it's not. Oftentimes they may be students who have a medical diagnosis, like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or oppositional defiant disorder. So they may have a diagnosis and they may have a disability, but they haven't been formally identified as requiring special education services. So these folks can work with any student, including our students who are, you know, just struggling to follow the rules. Some, you know, conduct violators. That's as we move into the secondary level, that's kind of what we run into, maybe more than at the elementary level, where we have kids who are struggling to self-regulate and deal with whatever they're bringing, that baggage that they come to school with in the morning. And so these folks deal with both populations, and that would be this person's role, much like our social worker who works across, you know, whether it's regular education students with needs or special ed students. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Hey, Kelly, it's Kenny.
Yes.
If you can answer this, and I'm assuming you can, could you just run down for the board right now what's in place that we've already established over the years for the mental health, which would include the guidance, the social worker? Could you just kind of put that roadmap out there for us?
Do you mind if I pull up that document so I can refer to it?
Sure.
Just give me a second. Dr. Perrin had us work on this week. Brandy and I worked on this on, oh wait, this is only Monday. We worked on it on Friday. In a virtual world, it doesn't matter what day of the week it is. In the last year that John Lewis was here as the coordinator of educational services, in the last full year that he was here in 18 and 19, we had an opportunity to, and I'm not a grant, I wasn't part of this grant development. So, but we had some opportunities to get some mental health services into Gettysburg through the PCCD grant. And so what we did at that point, what John Lewis did is he contracted with our SAP provider, and every district is required to have SAP. SAP stands for Student Assistance Programming. It's a mandate, K to 12. it's funded by the county for mental health and DNA assessments for 6th through 12th grade. It is not funded. So it's an unfunded state mandate in the elementary levels. We've been funding elementary SAP as a school district since 2007 or 2008, where we use our agency, True North Wellness, which is our assigned outside agency to help assess students. So that has been going on for years. This new mental health support was started to kind of enhance that and to use those same people that students were familiar with to provide a little bit more in-school supports. And, but it's, you know, it's maybe an hour a week or maybe an hour every other week. Those mental health supports through True North can also be considered outpatient treatment. However, that's if the family has insurance, and that's insurance funded. That's not funded by the district, but it is the same individual what the student might be used to seeing in the school district. So those are not necessarily funded by the school district, but they take place in our, each school has a small conference room or area where students can have the privacy of working through some of the things they're working with. In also in 1819, one of the other things that John Lewis brought to the district was also funded through a grant, and that is a social emotional curriculum. And it started in kindergarten and this year expanded to 1st grade. So a social emotional curriculum is a curriculum taught to students by classroom teachers to teach students to understand and manage their own behaviors and to self-regulate. And so that's a great place to start with a social emotional. You may see the acronym SEL. And so those are some of the embedded emotional, supportive sort of mental health things that we have been doing. They target a small group of kids. That targets, you know, kindergarten and 1st grade students through classroom lessons. Their guidance counselors also assist. And the other in-school supports from True North are for a small handful of students also whose parents have agreed and maybe have medical assistance or other family insurance to get that additional support. Obviously the contract that we approved last week for the ESS is a much more intense full wraparound support, meaning wraparound, meaning we take those students where they are and provide all the support that they need in school through that clinical model, and support kids through their challenges. And, you know, if those kids encounter some difficulties during the day, those on-site clinicians are there because when students are getting in trouble and they have some issues in class, oftentimes they're trying to get out of class for a very good reason. Anxiety or task avoidance in schoolwork sets them off, or a classmate gets them agitated. And where those kids go now is to their guidance counselors and to the assistant principal. And it looks like a behavior referral as opposed to treating that maybe underlying mental health reason. And so those kids will be able to go, those 20 students that we will be able to serve can go to their clinician and receive that mental health treatment because those folks are licensed clinicians providing therapy. So that's kind of the rundown of those supports.
So Kelly, if I could recap real quickly, just so I didn't miss anything. Right now within the Gettysburg Area School District, we have the SAP program. And I'm just looking at areas where we recognize the mental health issues along with behavioral issues. So we have the SAP, we have the guidance counselors, we have hired a social worker, which is inside the district now. We use True North, and that is clinicians. We also have started, we're running a curriculum of social and emotional, and we now have just put ESS support as a part of our
Yes.
district's recognition of mental health and the well-being of our students. Am I correct in that list?
Yes, you've hit them all.
Those are, everything that Kelly mentioned is all contained within the document that Carrie asked for at the last meeting, which was attached to your email on Friday.
Right, and I'll stop here. I just didn't want to there was a misconception or misinterpretation that that we may or may not have been providing or doing the best we can do to provide the awareness to this mental health. And that's why I wanted to hear that recap. I haven't heard it for probably 2 years, and we get it in bits and pieces. So I appreciate Kelly, you letting us know the overall big picture.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Kelly, I hope to thank you also. You're so incredibly thorough, and I think that it will probably clarify to some of the folks that wrote into us, really where we're at as a district. And I know that that's incredibly important to all of us as we got so many messages. Certainly the Gettysburg Times is not always a point of reference for factual information. As far as going forward, we certainly have been on a roll of adding staff, which I feel like we will not be able to do at an aggressive pace as we have set as a district. But again, thank you very much. I think that would be what you gave was so incredibly helpful for some of the questions that were asked by email. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Mr. Hassinger, do you want me to speak a little bit to Dean of Students position at this point? I know I tried to explain where we were coming from with that request last week, but I'll certainly reiterate and maybe follow up on any questions if there are any.
Yeah, Jeremy, you're more than welcome to. I think this is really the appropriate time as we start to move forward. And it's actually probably important for you so there's no misconceptions out there for exactly what you're looking for. I'm not suggesting there are, but no, please.
Sure, I didn't hear a lot of specific questions coming from the public. I did hear someone comment on something I may have said about lines in the guidance counseling office. If I said it that way, maybe I was using hyperbole. I don't know that we have lines of students waiting to access counselors, though we will have students that have difficulty leaving the counseling center at times. And when I was talking about issues in the last meeting, I can think about particular students in my head and know that as they come to school, as Kelly said, with challenges of all sorts, or maybe don't come to school because they have challenges of all sorts. It's really an all hands on deck approach to the challenges that those students present. And this position is designed to create focus for one person to attend to some very specific things. One, as we think about the mental health and wellness of our entire building, this position helps to work with the administrative team in designing a school-wide positive behavior support plan, school-wide. What do we do to reinforce desired behaviors in our schools systematically? And that is through the building into every single classroom. And this person would be a focus for that effort. That then leads to, well, what happens when students exhibit behaviors that don't fall in line with what we're trying to promote? The Dean of Students is obviously there to respond to disciplinary issues and work with the other administrators and sometimes counselors and sometimes teachers on that response. It's not to remove the role of assistant principals or even me at times from discipline and the processes related to it. But this person could truly focus on that to make sure that our responses are consistent and in line with what we're trying to promote and achieve in the building. Like I said, some students who have a variety of challenges don't make it to the building, which is why we have, and many schools have, chronic attendance problems right now. And it all falls in line with mental health, many times at least. So this person would then take on, with a focus, the process of the student attendance improvement conferences, which are a requirement that comes down from the state. So as you start to miss days, it's required that we come up with a specific individualized plan with that student and the family to improve attendance. And that takes focus and time. There's a pretty extensive schedule for those types of meetings. So behavior and attendance, sometimes they merge. This position would have a heavy focus on both of those things, but also participating in some of the systems that attended the whole building. This person would be on our SAP team and would work with the counselors and the rest of the student assistance program in caring for the needs of students that would enter that program, work directly with the pupil services team, which would be a combination of counselors, administrators, school nurse, and some others, just to make sure that, again, we're all collectively caring for students that are challenged, but this person is specifically focused on those kids, basically being the coordinator of all the other pieces, including counselors, teachers, administrators, and others. We talked about FBAs and positive behavior support plans for individual students a week ago, and they came up in conversation. And I think we said that, at this point, counselors write FBAs. That means we have 3 different counselors writing FBAs, maybe in a fairly consistent way, maybe not. The dean of students would write every functional behavior assessment, working with the school psychologists, and then working on the response plans in reaction to whatever the assessment showed. And to have someone consistently doing that, working with the counselors, administrators, school psychologists, it's going to improve the quality of life and wellness in the building. That's the goal. And then the effect of that is an investment in the overall mental wellness and health of the building. And that can be measured in all kinds of different quantitative and qualitative ways. And it's interesting, as you talk about, I'd like to see the effects of some of these SBRs, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, and think about whether, these decisions play out the way we want them to. And we spoke a week ago about the fact that there's times where we need to place challenging students in other placements that are very, very costly. And one of our goals is to slow that placement process. So if we can create systems and have someone focused on attending to all the parts of those systems really, really well, you can then keep students in the building as opposed to placing them. And I said that, in my mind, this person also helps make sure that some of the professional development that the Effective School Solutions folks will soon offer us come to fruition at the high school with a focus on those things. So I see this as an investment, and financially speaking, somewhere where we actually make financial gains and also improve life for students in the high school. And I know we also talked about the impact on the rest of the team as we offer impact statements with these SBRs. Part of this, as I said last week, is also due to the fact that the administrative responsibility over some of our technical programs will increase as we separate directly with Adams County Technical Institute, because we'll have 5 programs of study that we'll need to attend to and do everything that's required to maintain those programs well. And I can't begin to really put together a short summary of what it requires to do that in terms of Perkins grant funding and maintaining all the programs of study and the components that flow into those. is specific and time consuming to attend to those things well. And the administrative team is going to need to pick up that slack as Mr. Eckenrode fully focuses on Adams County Technical Institute starting next year. So anyhow, there's any questions, I'd certainly address them if you have specifics.
Any board members?
Actually, Mr. Luss, thank you for that explanation. I did have a slew of questions, which I no longer feel the need to ask, so, which my colleagues are probably happy about as well, but thank you for that. And thanks for clarifying that there really is not a line of students outside the counseling office, because that is truly an image that has been haunting me since I first heard it said.
No, there's not. And yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I mean, attendance at school is mission critical, and we need our students there. We need them engaged. So thank you for explaining this better to us tonight.
Yeah, and along with what I said about the counselors, you know, they will spend a lot of time on a singular issue, as do we as school administrators. There will be things that happen on a given day that take the next half of the day or the rest of the day from you when you hadn't originally planned for that. That might be a disciplinary issue. So when you have things to attend to, like supervising learning, you know, teaching and learning, sometimes the plans to do that, which we all wish we could focus on more, go by the wayside. And if you have someone on board who can, again, focus and attend to some of those things, improvement happens in other places, and it's difficult to measure the effect of that sometimes. And again, this person could help the administrative team and the counseling center on a variety of fronts.
Folks, anybody else have any additional questions for Jeremy this evening?
Thank you for the time. And again, thanks for all that you folks do. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Hey, Kenny, this is Mike.
Hey, Mike. Is that Mike?
Hey. Yeah, this is Mike.
I got you.
So I just wanted to make a couple of points. Kelly, thank you so much for that synopsis on all the valuable mental health services that we provide our students and some of the great stuff the district is doing. And Dr. Perrin, thank you for your budget preview. I was trying to make some comments earlier, having some technical issues apparently, but what I wanted to iterate, and I kind of heard mentioned, is a lot of the variables are out of our control in terms of what the pandemic has brought and different things. I did hear something that surprised me a little bit. I don't feel that in terms of when something becomes out of our control, the first thing we should do, or the first consideration we should have, is how much index we have to be able to increase taxes to meet shortfalls. We have seen probably over the last few years the greatest economy that most of us have seen in our lifetimes. And unfortunately, I think, I don't want to be the wet blanket, but we have no idea what's going to be coming up, next year, the following years. But I think we all need to be extremely careful and take the most cautious approach in terms of what we can all do to try and tighten the belt, for lack of a better term. I think that there's a lot of uncertainties, both in terms of revenue and the ability to collect that revenue, and what the legislature may or may not do in terms of limiting school districts' ability to levy tax increases or however. But I just wanted to make that point. We need to be stewards of the community. And also, I know I'm a very new school board member, but I know some of the stuff that has taken place, and a lot of the way business seems to be done in education is school districts that are similar in size and demographics and geography, with their intermediate units, kind of get together and decide as a consortium, what they plan on doing. And I think we need to really do what is best for Gettysburg area school district residents, teachers, and students. So, going into this budget season, I'm sure that we have some really talented folks in the budget office and the administrators, and Dr. Perrin and Dr. Lay. So I just wanted to get that out there.
Thank you, Mike. Does any other board member have any questions of Dr. Perrin this evening, or anybody that's joining us here on Zoom? Okay, with Dr. Perrin, did you have anything else to add? Yeah, you want to turn on?
Don't have any anything significant to add. Just that that I hope that I hope we've clarified this evening that the SRO special budget request is not a mental health support position. It is a safety and security position. Thanks.
Jason, Kathleen, just to clarify that particular SBR, I recall you saying in last week's meeting that it originated with the borough of Gettysburg approaching the school district and saying, we've got this suggestion for you. Is that the case, or did this request originate in the buildings themselves, the principals, the teachers, the staff coming forward and saying, we have a need for a second SRO?
Combination of both. I would say when I first came to the district, there was an SRO in place here. So in conversations over those first couple of years, administrators have expressed an interest in a second position. I would say that the being approached by the borough was just a part of going through this year's process. So I think we've always had an interest in a second position. It's just finding the right time to do that. And I think at this point, we're really kind of approaching the SBR as, talking about it in terms of the SRO position. And then if it would actually be approved in this year's budget, we would look at probably doing, as was discussed in the last meeting, kind of a request for proposals to see who might be interested in responding to that.
Thank you.
Any additional comments or questions? Okay, with that, we obviously do not have any board committee reports and building or ground reports, which would bring us to the calendar of events. Our next meeting is on May 4th. I will let the board know that I've had discussion with Dr. Perrin as to how we can, as we move closer in this budget process, to accommodate any of the public that would want to come out to our board meeting and/or any board members that feel comfortable enough with social distancing, conforming to the guidelines set by not only the state, but the CDC. And we did come up with an option of using the Gettysburg, one of the Gettysburg auditoriums, and arranging the seating that would accommodate to stay within that. That's still open for discussion. Some of the emails that we've gotten obviously indicate there's an interest in our budget, and they can make their own decision as long as they're within the guidelines. And if we're still under that in May 4th, which I'm presuming we will be. But I just want to let you know I'll get something out in email. Every board member can obviously make their own decision, and we'll have Zoom available. But I'm certain, at least in my personal opinion, the middle school can safely handle people coming in to a limited degree that want to hear it in a public setting. So I don't know if anyone has any questions on that or comments. Nothing set in stone. It's just early discussions. Okay, having said that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Kenny,
I'm sorry, Carrie.
There was a committee meeting. It was the Adams County Technical Institute met. So we'll put this at the items at for the good of the order. So the Adams County Technical Institute did meet on April 22nd. There was quite a bit of discussion because the Conewaga Valley School District Board of Directors rejected the Adams County Technical Institute budget. They decided that was not the way the budget was arranged, was not within their means. And so it was brought back to the board of the Technical Institute. And there was a decision made to maintain the existing formula with 100% ADM with the average daily membership as the multiplier for the 2021 school year. And this ends up that it will be the budget will be created by Sean Eckenrode. It will go to Belinda, and it will become an information item on the next board meeting and then for action on the following board meetings. Just wanted to let you know that that information will be coming and that the Adams County Technical Institute did meet.
Yeah, I apologize. I did see that informational item that you sent out. Somebody sent out. I do appreciate it. I apologize. I totally forgot about that. In the state that we're in now, I keep getting caught up with building and grounds and policy and totally forgot that committee. Thank you, Carrie. Okay, so if there's nothing else anybody has for either the good or order, we have a motion for adjournment. I can't hear. Somebody's talking.
I'll put a motion forth for adjournment.
I second.
We are adjourned, folks.